What's up, guys? Welcome to the very first episode of The Real Remote Show. In case you haven't heard of Real Remote, we are a brand committed to the conservation of all species and the exploration of wild places. In this brand new podcast, I will be telling the stories and history of all things dealing with the outdoors and conservation. This week, I will be talking about the near extinction of North America's tallest bird, the whooping crane. You might be wondering that whooping crane is kind of a weird name for a bird. And if you have not heard one of their calls, this is going to be a sound that you're not going to forget. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a little bit of audio of one of their calls. Now that I was able to bless you with that sound that I have not been able to get out of my head since the first time I have heard it, we're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics that they have. Now, as I stated in the intro, it is the tallest species of bird native to North America and kind of range from being the third to the fifth heaviest on the continent, just different sources that say different things. Now, this species stands from anywhere from about 4 feet to about 5 feet in height. Yeah, I think that's pretty tall. It's like the size of some people around here, some children. They have a wingspan. It's around 6 feet to around 7.5 feet. So this is a very large bird compared to anything else in North America. Definitely one that's kind of hard to be mistaken for. Due to this being a podcast, I obviously cannot put a video in here, but I'm going to try to describe the way that this bird looks to the best of my ability. It's almost an all-white bird. The entire body is all white. It's got a little black kind of spot right near its beak, in between its eye and its beak. And then it has a little red crown right on top. All right, so we kind of got the characteristics, the description of this bird that you can try to mentally image. Now let's talk about their range. So at one time, this bird did stretch all the way from Midwestern North America up through Canada, all the way down through Mexico. So what I haven't brought up yet is that these birds are endangered. As what happened with a lot of species in North America that we'll probably talk about in later podcasts, is that this population of these species began to go down as the settlers were moving west. So a lot of these birds were getting hunted for food because they're large birds, but able to feed a lot of people. Something else that led to their kind of downfall in the population is the habitat loss. That kind of affects a lot of birds in North America. So they live in like swampy areas. So a lot of these swamps were drained of water, which took away the crane's food. And they would have to move elsewhere, and then there would be a lot of competition with other birds to try and survive. So prior to westward expansion and English settlements, there was thought that there was tens of thousands across North America. But then by 1860, there was thought maybe there was only around 1,400 left. And then in 1938, only 15 birds. What a huge population drop-off just due to the expansion of settlements across North America. All right, so due to this giant drop-off from tens of thousands prior to settlements to 15 birds in 1938, it was finally listed as endangered in 1967 under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966. That was a lot of dates or years that I just threw out of there. So the Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966 is the predecessor to the Endangered Species Act, which in later podcasts I'll be talking a lot about also. I'll more than likely do an entire episode just on the Endangered Species Act because there's so much we can talk about that specific act and how it came to be. Okay, off the Endangered Species Act and back to the whooping crane. So, due to it becoming endangered, there's finally things that are going to be able to get done to be able to try and preserve this species. So some captive breeding programs did begin that were able to try to start saving this species, get them out of the wild, get them protected, get them taken away from their predators. So the predators that this bird species had was a lengthy list, right? They had the black bear, the wolverine, gray wolf, cougar, red fox, lynx, bald eagle, common raven. They had just about every predator coming after them. There were some golden eagles have taken a few of the fledglings. So already having to deal with humans with their habitat loss and by being hunted, they also had to deal with all these predators that I just named. So they were definitely kind of getting hit from all sides. Now all this predation didn't really affect the adult birds as much because like I said, they stand 4 to 5 feet tall. Tallest bird in North America, one of the heaviest. A lot of this affected the young, which we've seen with other species. When the young gets affected, it obviously will affect the adult population at some point. All right, so I'm going to throw this little bit in there because it's kind of going to give us a preview for next week. So an issue that some of the juvenile cranes had just being less experienced, so they were getting ambushed by bobcats, which kind of was due to a lower population of other larger predators like the Florida panther, which as we know is endangered, and the extirpated red wolf. Next week's episode will be on the red wolf. I decided to go ahead and throw that one in there. All right, back again to the whooping crane. All right, so there was also a ban on all hunting to these cranes because, as I stated earlier, on top of habitat loss, they were getting hunted a lot because they're a large bird. You can feed a lot of people. Now, a lot of these hunters could not care less about these imposed hunting laws. As we deal with now, you still have poachers. We had poachers back then, we have poachers now. So the rest of the cranes that were still in the wild were still getting hunted. And as I talked about earlier, in 1938, there were only 15 adults in one of the migratory flocks, and there were about 13 others in a non-migratory population in Louisiana. But in 1940, a hurricane hit Louisiana and it scattered them. So after they were scattered, about half of them were killed just in the hurricane itself, and then all the ones that were left were never able to reproduce in the wild again. So that was a lot of depressing history on how the whooping crane was numbered in tens of thousands across North America to just 15 birds in 1938. But this species is looked at as a win for conservation for a specific reason. So after being only down to 15 birds and the captive breeding programs working, there were a lot that were reintroduced to some of their native range. So there was a 5-year review done by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife in 2011. There are 4 geographically distinct populations of this bird. So the first population we're going to talk about is the Aransas wood buffalo population. I hope I did not butcher that name. So they migrate between the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge in Texas, and they go all the way up to the Wood Buffalo National Park in Alberta, Canada. So that population was one that is naturally self-sustaining. There are a couple that were reintroduced. One of those is the Central Florida population. They were reintroduced between 1993 and 2005. There were some species placed out there. Another one of the populations is the Eastern Migratory population. And as the name states, these birds do migrate. They were introduced from 2001 to 2010, and they go between Wisconsin and Florida. The last population that is still around is the White Lake, Louisiana population. So as we said before, there was the last species population from before were in Louisiana, but they were taken out by that hurricane. This non-migratory flock was placed there in 2011. Now, of course, not all the populations make it. So there was one population that was placed in the Rocky Mountains between 1975 and 1989, and the last bird from that population died in spring of 2002. So that last population I was talking about, they were placed in the Rocky Mountains between 1975 and 1989. Now, as we stated earlier, is that the population was placed on the Endangered Species Preservation Act in the 1960s. So there was kind of a quick, hurried up response to these birds' population dropping so much. That's only, I think, 9 years before they were trying to reintroduce populations back into the wild. To finish off the day on a positive note, so from 15 birds in 1938, now today we are at around 600 birds. There is still a long way to go until we're able to get the birds back to where they were, if they ever are able to recover from the dramatic downsize of their population. If you want to look any more into the whooping crane, you can find out a lot about these birds on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife page, the allaboutbirds.org, Audubon Society, or savingcranes.org. So guys, that is going to wrap it up for episode 1 of the Real Remote Show on the whooping crane. If you see anything in this podcast that you'd like to fix, go ahead and send us an email to show@realremote.com. If you want to check out some more Real Remote content, find all of it at realremote.com, Real Remote Outdoors on YouTube, and at Real Remote on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Appreciate you guys listening this week, and I'll catch you next time.